The arena was alive, vibrating with the usual hum of anticipation that defines Friday nights. But nobody was ready for the void that followed. It didn't start with music, didn't start with pyrotechnics or a flashing Titantron. It started with a glitch, a sudden, violent tear in the broadcast feed that sent the monitors in the arena black. For 3 agonizing seconds, 20,000 people were plunged into a darkness so heavy it felt physical. The noise died instantly. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the squeak of a chair, the confused murmur of a child in the front row. It was the sound of oxygen leaving the room. Then, a single, distorted frequency cut through the silence, a low, mechanical hum that grew louder, vibrating in the chests of everyone from ringside to the nosebleeds. The commentary team froze. You could feel the panic in their silence. They weren't acting, they were waiting. The producers in the truck scrambled, headsets screaming, unsure if the show had been hijacked or if the system had failed. But the darkness lingered, stretching the tension until it felt like a rubber band ready to snap. And then, the lights flickered once, twice bathed in a bruised purple hue. The frequency stopped. A heartbeat sound echoed over the PA system. Thump, 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 thump. The crowd realized it before the announcers did. The air shifted from confusion to a primal, electric terror. This wasn't a malfunction. This was an arrival. The kind of arrival that doesn't just interrupt a show, it rewrites the timeline. The commentary team finally broke their paralysis, their voices cracking, not with hype, but with genuine, unscripted disbelief. Can't be, one whispered, the microphone barely picking up the tremble. Tell me I'm seeing things. When the smoke cannons finally erupted, they didn't shoot toward the ceiling. They rolled across the stage like a creeping fog, heavy and deliberate. Through the haze, a silhouette emerged, not running, not posing, just standing. The silhouette was motionless. A dark statue against the blinding backlight. The arena didn't explode immediately. It gasped. It was a collective intake of breath. A moment where time seemed to suspend itself in midair. Then, the recognition hit. It hit like a shockwave. The roar that followed wasn't a cheer. It was a guttural, deafening sound of validation, a mixture of screaming and crying that shook the camera lenses. He began to walk. It was a slow, predatory gait. Every step measured, heavy with the weight of years spent in exile. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't slap hands. He walked with his eyes locked on the ring, ignoring the thousands of hands reaching out just to touch the hem of his legacy. The commentary team was losing their minds, screaming over the noise, trying to contextualize a moment that defied logic. "Look at the eyes," shouted the play-by-play announcer, his voice shredding. "Those are the eyes of a man who has burned every bridge just to find his way back." The camera zoomed in tight on his face. There were lines there that hadn't been there before, scars that told stories the dirt sheets never knew. He looked dangerous, not in the performative wrestling sense, but in the way a storm is dangerous, unpredictable, uncontrollable. He stopped at the bottom of the ramp, looking up at the ring posts, as if they were the gates of judgment. The referee inside the ring backed away, instinctively retreating to the corner, sensing that the script had just been thrown out the window. He pulled himself up to the apron, not with the spring of a rookie, but with the deliberate haul of a veteran who knows the cost of entering that square circle. He wiped his boots on the canvas, a ritual, a sign of respect, or perhaps a warning. The music cut. The pyro smoke lingered in the rafters, creating a haze that made the lights fracture into beams of divine judgment. He stood in the center of the ring, the microphone in his hand, but he didn't lift it. He just stood there, letting the noise wash over him. The crowd was chanting his name, a rhythmic, thundering invocation that made the floorboards tremble. He looked around, his expression unreadable. Was it gratitude? Was it rage? Then he raised the microphone. The arena went silent instantly. The control he commanded was terrifying. 20,000 people hushed in a microsecond, hanging on the precipice of his first word. But he didn't speak. He simply looked at the hard camera, his eyes piercing through the lens, through the television screens, and straight into the living rooms of millions. "I didn't come back to save this place," he finally said, his voice low, gravelly, and stripped of any character facade. "I came back to burn it down." The statement hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't a catchphrase, it was a promise. The commentary team was stunned into silence again. This wasn't the heroic return they had marketed, this was an invasion. He dropped the microphone. The thud echoed like a gavel striking a sound block. He turned and exited the ring, leaving the audience confused, terrified, and utterly captivated. He hadn't wrestled a match, but he had just won the war. The moment he passed through the curtain to the backstage area, the facade of the show crumbled. The cameras followed him, shaky and raw, capturing the reality of the aftermath. Other wrestlers, men and women who usually played titans on screen, were pressed against the walls, watching him pass with genuine awe and trepidation. The locker room wasn't celebrating, it was on high alert. You could see the fear in the eyes of the current champions, the sudden realization that their title reigns were now just placeholders until he decided to take what was his. Social media was already melting down. Trending topics were a monolith of his name. Servers crashed on forums. Blurry screenshots of his face flooded timelines. The entire ecosystem of the industry had shifted in 5 minutes. Reporters were screaming into their phones trying to get confirmation, trying to understand if this was a work or a shoot. The line had blurred completely. The general manager was seen shouting at producers, waving his arms, looking like a captain whose ship had just been commandeered by a ghost. Back in the arena, the fans hadn't sat down. They were looking at each other, checking their phones, trying to process the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. The match that was scheduled to follow was dead on arrival. Nobody cared. The oxygen had been sucked out of the building and carried away on the shoulders of one man. The broadcast team tried to pivot, tried to sell the next segment, but their voices sounded hollow. They knew, just like everyone else, that nothing else mattered tonight. The hierarchy had been decapitated. The king had returned, and he wasn't carrying an olive branch. He was carrying a sword. As the show went off the air, the feed didn't cut to a copyright logo. It cut to a black and white shot of him sitting in his locker room, staring at a mirror. He looked exhausted. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the human being beneath the myth. He unlaced his boots slowly, his hands trembling slightly. It was a rare, intimate glimpse into the cost of greatness. We realized then that the anger we saw in the ring wasn't hatred for the fans. It was the frustration of a man who tried to leave the violence behind but found he couldn't live without it. This wasn't just a return for ratings. It was a tragedy unfolding in real time. The twist wasn't that he was back. The twist was that he was trapped. He was a prisoner of his own legacy, doomed to chase the roar of the crowd until his body gave out. The screen faded to black slowly, lingering on his reflection, a man who had everything the world could offer, yet looked completely alone. The broadcast ended, leaving millions in silence. We thought we wanted him back. We clamored for the nostalgia, for the shock, for the moment. But as the screen went dark, the realization settled in. We didn't just witness a wrestling return. We witnessed a man accepting his fate. He didn't come back to win a championship. He came back because the silence of a normal life was louder than any arena. And that is the most terrifying truth of all.